It was a warning gesture. Relax.
You waved that thing inches from my child's face.
She's trespassing. Remove her now. The voice snapped like a whip behind me, sharp, rehearsed, dripping with authority she never actually earned. I turned just in time to see Roxanne Treadwell, our beloved clipboard queen, marching toward the playground fence with her heels stabbing the mulch like she wanted to break the earth open. She wasn't looking at me. She was glaring at my 2-year-old daughter on the tiny plastic slide, as if a toddler using community equipment was some kind of federal crime. You picked the wrong afternoon, I told her quietly, letting my body shift just enough to block her line of sight. She scoffed, dismissive, ready to hurl another threat. I didn't give her the chance. That sensor you're waving around, I said, nodding at the little BB pistol-shaped device in her hand. It still pings back to the server I built. Her face twitched, one quick glitch in the arrogance she'd worn all year. The officer of rules wasn't ready for that. Not for someone who understood her violations better than she understood her own authority. If you've ever felt that fire in your chest when someone targets the one person you can't live without, stay right here and hit subscribe now. I drew in a slow breath, anchoring myself in the only truth that mattered. Where are you watching from? I asked softly, because moments like these, they happen everywhere. And people everywhere deserve to see how far a parent goes to protect their child. My name's Ethan Hale, I continued, and this neighborhood wasn't supposed to swallow my family whole. That slide, I glanced at the bright blue plastic under my daughter's tiny shoes, was the last thing her mother ever bought before the accident. It's the one place she still laughs without fear. The tyrant in heels didn't care. She never did. She stepped closer, heels crunching like slow gunfire. Your daughter isn't authorized for unsupervised play, she declared. She's 2, I said, and I'm holding her hand. That's not what the covenant says. She lifted the BB pistol-shaped device higher, as if she'd been waiting all week to use it. My pulse hit like a hammer, because grief hits twice. Once when you lose someone, and again when the world tries to steal what they left behind. My daughter's laugh, that small, shaky giggle she made when the slide wobbled, that was the last living thread tying her to her mother. And this woman, this enforcer in crimson with a power complex, thought she could sever it. Put that thing down, I told her. No, she said. You need consequences. She raised her arm. I didn't know the exact mechanics yet. I didn't know how fast it traveled, or how hard it hit, or whether she even understood the risk. All I knew was that she pointed it toward my child, and that single gesture ripped open a wound I'd spent 2 years trying to stitch shut. Then the air cracked, a sharp metallic snap, a BB slicing so close to my daughter's shoulder that her hair fluttered in its wake. She froze. I froze. Even the swing set chains seemed to stop mid-sway. But Roxanne Treadwell didn't freeze. She lowered the weapon like she'd just swatted a fly. Playtime's over, she said, and that was the moment I knew everything had changed. Because when a parent hears that sound, that razor-thin whistle of something meant to harm their child, it rearranges the bones of who they are. It shapes them into something sharper, colder, unbreakable. I scooped my daughter into my arms, heart pounding like a warning drum. You just made this federal, I whispered. And I meant every word. I didn't even make it 5 steps from the playground before the sirens in my chest finally caught up to the moment. My daughter's tiny arms clung to my collar, her cheek pressed against my shoulder, trembling so hard I felt every shake like an accusation. That sound, the BB slicing past her, kept replaying in a loop loud enough to drown the world. And right behind us, heels clicked on concrete with the smug rhythm of someone who thought she'd won. Roxanne Treadwell wasn't done. Of course she wasn't. The officer of rules never stopped when she sensed vulnerability. You're leaving the scene of a violation, she called out, voice high and clipped, as if she hadn't just fired a projectile at a toddler. You'll be receiving formal notice. I turned just enough to meet her eyes. Not today, I said. Not after what you did. Her lips twitched. The same little mocking curl she used on the elderly couple last month when she accused them of unauthorized gardening. She loved this. The control, the fear, the power that wasn't supposed to be hers. That BB pistol in her hand still glinted like a threat she hadn't finished making. You're escalating, the clipboard queen replied. I gave a safety directive. You ignored it. A safety directive? I repeated, shifting my daughter's weight carefully. You fired at a child. She didn't flinch. A non-lethal device to gain compliance. Non-lethal. They always said that before an emergency room visit proved otherwise. My daughter's fingers tightened in my shirt, and that was enough. I stepped back toward the picnic tables where families gathered for birthday parties, weekend snacks, the normal life I'd been trying to build since losing my wife. Every parent stared at us, some shocked, some terrified, some suddenly aware of how quickly this community had turned into something darker. That's when the pattern started to snap into place. 3 weeks ago, Roxanne Treadwell had cornered a mother for letting her son ride a tricycle on the sidewalk. Unauthorized wheels on shared pavement. 2 weeks ago, she'd written up a veteran for having a flag slightly off-center. Unregulated pole angle. Last week, she patrolled the pool with a whistle, threatening fines for splashing too loudly. This wasn't sudden. This wasn't random. This was a steady climb towards something more aggressive, more unhinged. And today she'd crossed the line. The tyrant in heels walked closer, heels ticking across the pavement like countdown markers. I expect you in the HOA office within the hour, she announced. We'll be documenting the violation. Refusal to comply will escalate fines. You really think fines matter right now? I asked. They always matter, she replied. Because rules matter, not more than life. Her expression hardened, like she didn't even register the divide between inconvenience and danger. This was a woman who believed authority was the same as truth. A woman so obsessed with power that she'd forgotten she was dealing with humans, not obstacles. I scanned the playground again, watching parents pull their children close. Some whispered, some backed away entirely, avoiding her gaze like she could hurt them too if she chose to. That's when I saw the conflicted witness, standing near the shade structure, Caleb Monroe, a maintenance tech hired by the HOA. He wasn't making eye contact. His hands were shoved deep in his pockets, his shoulders stiff, his jaw clenched. He'd seen everything, and he looked sick. Not guilty, not scared. Torn. The first crack in her control. I carried my daughter toward the parking lot, but the enforcer in crimson wasn't finished wreaking her brand of order. If you leave, she yelled, it becomes an immediate escalated violation. I paused, turning just slightly so she could see her words weren't hitting the way she expected. You're worried about violations, I said. I'm worried about trajectory. Her face froze, because the moment I used that word, trajectory, her gaze flicked to the weapon in her hand. She knew what I meant. She knew who my wife had been. She knew I understood angles, impact distance, ricochet patterns. She knew I'd seen enough military investigations to know exactly what her stunt had become the moment she pulled that trigger. She swallowed, a crack in the armor. Good. I opened my truck door and buckled my daughter in her seat. Her eyes were still glossy, her lashes wet. I brushed her hair back gently. You're safe, I whispered. I promise. When I stood, Roxanne Treadwell was still there, still clinging to the illusion of control. But something had shifted. She finally realized this wasn't a playground argument. This was a federal line she'd just crossed. Caleb Monroe was still standing under the shade structure when I pulled out of the parking lot, his posture tight, his eyes avoiding everyone except the ground. Even from a distance, even through the tinted window, I could see the war happening inside him. He wasn't just shaken. He looked like a man trapped between loyalty and conscience, between a paycheck and the truth. And Roxanne Treadwell, the self-appointed officer of rules, kept glancing back at him like she expected obedience on command. That told me everything. People don't stare at the innocent. They stare at the ones they're afraid might talk. I took my daughter home, settled her with her favorite blanket, and sat on the living room floor long enough for her breathing to soften into something steady again. Only then did I step outside onto the porch. And there he was. Caleb. He stood at the edge of my lawn like he wasn't sure he had permission to move any closer. His hands were in his pockets again, his shoulders rounded inward. But his eyes? They flicked up at me only once, then darted away like looking at me too long might get him in trouble. That was the internal struggle. Guilt, fear, conflict. All of it wrapped in one stiff, uneasy stance. I walked toward him slowly. He didn't back away, but he didn't step forward either. You saw what she did. I told him quietly. His jaw tensed. I wasn't supposed to be there. But you were. He swallowed, and his Adam's apple jumped like the truth had gotten stuck halfway out. He rubbed the back of his neck, eyes still avoiding mine, shifting his weight like the ground kept tilting beneath him. Roxanne said it was a compliance device, he muttered. She fired it at a 2-year-old. He flinched, not dramatically, not noticeably to anyone, but someone trained to study micro-reactions the way my wife once did at crime scenes. But it was there, a reflexive jolt of horror he tried to bury instantly. She said... He stopped, closed his eyes, tried again. She said it would just scare her, not hurt her. Did you believe her? He didn't answer. He didn't need to. His gaze dropped to his shoes, his fingers twitched against his leg. He shifted back on his heels, then forward again, like his body wanted to bolt, but his conscience forced him to stay rooted. Roxanne Treadwell, the clipboard queen, had clearly warned him already. The fear was written across his entire posture, shoulders tight, chin tucked, breath shallow. But something else cracked through that fear, something heavier, shame. She's going to write you up, he whispered. She said you'll be fined for leaving, for aggressive behavior. I wiped a hand over my face. She shot at my child, and she's filing paperwork? He hesitated, his left hand balled into a fist. His eyes finally lifted to mine, just for a second. 1 second. But in that second, he let me see it. He wanted to tell the truth. He wanted to tear himself away from her control, but he was terrified of what that would cost him. That's why you came here, I told him softly, because you know what you saw. He stepped back, breath catching. I shouldn't be here, he muttered, shaking his head. If she finds out I talked to you, she already suspects you might. And he froze. Completely frozen, like the world paused on a single truth. He wasn't safe with her. I watched panic flicker across his face. Not wild panic, quiet panic. The kind that lives in someone's gut for months, maybe years, until one moment forces it to surface. That's why you're shaking, I said gently. Because for the first time, you realize she's not just strict, she's dangerous. He swallowed hard, looked at the ground, looked at me, looked back at the ground. I can't let a kid get hurt, he whispered. There it was, the break, the line he couldn't cross, the loyalty he couldn't keep, the truth starting to rise despite everything she'd threatened him with. We'll talk, I promised. When you're ready. Caleb nodded once, barely, and walked away with the weight of someone finally choosing a side. By morning, my phone buzzed with 3 notifications from the HOA portal, each one stamped with the digital signature of Roxanne Treadwell, as if she'd stayed up all night sharpening her claws. The clipboard queen had moved fast, filing violations that read more like personal attacks than policy enforcement. Unsafe conduct, hostile response, parent negligence. She even claimed my daughter had disrupted community harmony. Community harmony! She fired into my yard, and we disrupted harmony. I stared at the screen long enough for my blood to thrum in my ears. But I didn't react, not yet. Rage makes mistakes, strategy makes history. And judging by the speed of the filings, the enforcer in crimson was desperate, panicking in silence, striking first to control the narrative before the truth caught up. That told me something else too. She knew she crossed a federal line, and she thought burying us under paperwork might buy her time. She had no idea who she was dealing with. I stepped outside, scanning the neighborhood. A few doors down, curtains fluttered. People were watching. Not openly, not obviously, but the tension was thick. This was no longer just about my family. There was a crack in the community, one that had been widening long before yesterday. And Roxanne. She was standing at the center like a conductor, waving her baton of fear. An email pinged next. Subject line, mandatory meeting, attendance required. Of course, a classic move from the officer of rules. Prove dominance by forcing her target into a room she controls. I read the body of the email twice. It was scheduled for tonight, barely 12 hours from now. That alone broke 2 HOA procedural requirements. But she didn't care about rules, not in the way she demanded we pretend to. My wife stepped onto the porch, the morning sun catching her hair, calm but sharp-eyed. She's panicking, she said softly. Look at the timestamp. She sent those between 2 and 3 a.m. Guilty conscience? I asked. No, damage control. She held up her phone. On the screen was a freeze frame from our security camera footage, the tiny trajectory arc she had digitally highlighted, clean, undeniable, and perfectly captured. Her shot came from a downward angle, my wife said, her forensic brain already working, which means she was closer to the fence than she claimed. She fired from your property line. A chill ran down my spine. She trespassed and discharged a projectile toward a child. She looked me in the eyes. That's why she's doing all this. She knows what that means legally. My jaw tightened. Roxanne, the tyrant in heels, had always relied on intimidation, harsh letters, petty threats. But this time, she'd crossed into criminal territory, and she could feel the ground shifting beneath her. Around noon, I walked to the mailbox to clear my head, only to see her striding down the sidewalk with a stack of clipboards tucked under her arm. She wore that signature red blazer, the one that practically screamed entitlement. Her heels clicked like a metronome of control. She spotted me, smiled, a thin, strained expression that didn't reach her eyes. "You should prepare for your meeting tonight," she said, her tone dripping superiority. "There will be consequences for yesterday's behavior." "Whose behavior?" I asked quietly. For the first time, something flickered across her face, uncertainty, maybe even fear, but she swallowed it instantly. "You've violated several community standards," she continued, "and I intend to address them." I stepped closer, keeping my voice calm. "Funny, I intend to address something too." Her grip on the clipboards tightened. A muscle jumped in her jaw. She turned sharply and walked away faster than she'd approached. She felt the shift. She felt the threat beneath my calm. She knew I wasn't playing her game anymore. Back inside, I pulled up the footage again, studying the angle my wife uncovered. This wasn't just evidence. It was leverage. And tonight, for the first time, Roxanne wouldn't be the one in control. The meeting wasn't a trap. It was an opening. And I planned to walk straight through it. The mandatory meeting wasn't until 7 p.m., but by late afternoon, Roxanne Treadwell was already moving through the neighborhood like she was staging a military operation. The board chair carried her clipboards door to door, whispering to homeowners, knocking softly, slipping papers into mail slots. Every movement of hers had a nervous speed to it, as if she were trying to outrun the truth we held in our hands. From my living room window, I watched the enforcer in crimson gesture animatedly in the cul-de-sac, pointing toward our property like we were some kind of contamination threatening the community's bloodstream. A couple of neighbors nodded hesitantly. Others looked away, and one woman shut the door before Roxanne could finish her pitch. The tide was shifting. She just didn't know how quickly yet. My wife stood at the dining table, enlarging the trajectory map on her forensic software. "Look at this," she murmured, circling a precise angle in red. The shot didn't drift, no wind distortion, clean line. This means she fired intentionally, not accidentally. My stomach tightened. "You're saying she aimed?" "I'm saying she meant to send a message." She looked at me with controlled calm. "And the message hit our fence 6 inches from our toddler." I exhaled slowly. The rage wasn't wild or chaotic now. It was measured, targeted, strategic. Because her analysis wasn't speculation. It was evidence. Evidence the clipboard queen never expected us to possess. While she worked, I stepped outside to clear my head and nearly collided with Marcus Hilburn, the conflicted witness. His posture was stiff, shoulders slightly raised, eyes darting around like he was afraid Roxanne might appear from behind a bush. He began, swallowing nervously. "You going to the meeting tonight?" "Yes," I said. "Are you?" Marcus hesitated, shifting on his feet. I don't know how she'll react if I show up." That said everything. The tyrant in heels had gotten to him. But fear can only hold someone so long before the truth outweighs it. "She fired at my family, Marcus," I said quietly. "This isn't about dues or fences. You saw what happened. You know what she's trying to bury." His jaw tightened, guilt rising behind his eyes. "I didn't agree with what she did. But you didn't report it either." He shut his eyes for a moment, exhaling shakily. "I know. I didn't push him. The internal struggle was already tearing him apart, and I needed him to choose truth, not obedience." He stepped closer. "If she asks, you didn't talk to me," he whispered. "I'm not ready to..." you know, go against her yet. You don't owe her your silence, I said. But she thinks I do, he replied, turning away. The way his shoulders slumped told me exactly how tightly the officer of rules had him under her thumb. When he walked off, my wife appeared beside me. He's close, she said. He's cracking. People like Marcus don't sleep well when they're holding back something this big. Inside, I checked the HOA portal again. A new notification flashed. Meeting, agenda update, item added by Roxanne. Treadwell. Parenting conduct violation, endangerment through aggression. I let out a slow, incredulous laugh. She's doubling down. My wife leaned over my shoulder, scanning the agenda. She wants to portray you as hostile. It's her only strategy now. If she makes you look unstable, she thinks she can shift suspicion. But she missed something crucial. CSI work had trained my wife to speak in facts, and facts don't bend to HOA narratives. Around 6 p.m., as the sun dipped low, the enforcer in crimson strutted past our driveway again, chin high, hips stiff, pretending confidence. She absolutely didn't feel. She slid a small stack of papers under a neighbor's door, then glanced over her shoulder at me. The look she gave wasn't triumph. It was fear wearing arrogance like a mask. Because deep down, she sensed something was coming, something she couldn't control with clipboards or late-night filings. The truth had a trajectory now, too, and tonight, in that meeting room, it was going to hit her harder than anything she ever fired. The HOA meeting room was already half filled when we arrived, folding chairs, scraping, hushed whispers carrying across the stale fluorescent air. And right at the center of it all, Roxanne Treadwell stood like she was posing for a courtroom painting. Arms crossed, chin lifted, that signature crimson blazer sharp enough to cut the silence in half. The board chair watched me from the moment I walked in, eyes narrowed, calculating, not angry, worried. That was my first sign the night would shift. My wife carried her equipment bag, nothing dramatic, nothing flashy, just her quiet confidence as a CSI analyst, the type of confidence the enforcer in crimson couldn't intimidate. She placed a slim folder on her lap, and the subtle click of the clasp drew the attention of 3 neighbors sitting nearby. Roxanne noticed. Her jaw tightened. Good. I took a seat close to the front, not to provoke her, but to make it clear I wasn't hiding. The clipboard queen shuffled through her paperwork with fast, jerky motions, trying to look composed. Her bracelets jingled nervously. She didn't want this meeting. She wanted a spectacle she controlled. She wasn't going to get it. The room filled quickly. People were curious. People were whispering. And even though no one said it out loud, every single person here had heard the rumor. A gunshot, a family photo, a CSI wife who traced the trajectory instantly. The stakes were no longer HOA level, they were criminal. Roxanne tapped the microphone. Let's begin, she said tightly. We have several violations to address tonight. The tyrant in heels scanned her paperwork dramatically, then looked straight at me. Including one regarding aggressive behavior from... A voice cut her off. Roxanne, stop. It was Marcus Hilburn. The conflicted witness sat in the back row, and though his voice was soft, the words stopped the entire room. His knee bounced uncontrollably. His hands trembled against the chair. He wasn't ready to be brave, but he was too guilty to stay silent. The officer of rules glared at him. Marcus, this isn't your item. Stay in your lane. He swallowed hard. I can't. Everyone turned. Even my wife froze, sensing this was the pivot. Marcus stood, palms sweating, his breathing uneven. You said the sound was fireworks, he said shakily, eyes locked on Roxanne. But I was there. I saw where the impact hit the fence. Roxanne's expression snapped into warning mode. Marcus, no, he whispered. I'm not lying anymore. The room erupted in murmurs. Some gasped. Others stared like they'd just discovered the climax of a mystery novel. My wife leaned forward slightly. He's telling the truth, she said, voice controlled. And I have the trajectory analysis to match his observation. Silence. Roxanne's face drained of color, then flushed deep red, fear disguised as fury. She smacked a stack of papers on the table. None of this is admissible, she hissed. This is an HOA meeting, not a crime show. But a gun was fired, I said calmly, across property lines, toward a child. My words landed with the weight of something final. Neighbors shifted, eyes widened, nobody blinked. The enforcer in crimson tried to recover. "You can't prove—" My wife opened her folder. Complex diagrams, vector angles, impact patterns, photographed evidence. All clean, all scientific, all devastating. Gasps rippled through the room. Marcus sat down slowly, like the guilt was finally leaving his body. Roxanne stumbled back a half step. Just one, but enough. The room felt the shift. The clipboard queen no longer controlled it. I stood, meeting Roxanne's eyes with quiet resolve. "You escalated this," I told her, "not us. And before the night is over, the right people will know exactly what happened. Because this wasn't just HOA territory anymore. This was where my wife's expertise became the victory strategy, where community fear became community truth, where Roxanne Treadwell's control began to collapse, and everyone could feel it." Marcus didn't move for a long moment after his accidental confession in the meeting. Even when people started standing, even when chairs scraped and neighbors whispered, he sat frozen, like admitting the truth had stunned him as much as it stunned the board chair. And Roxanne Treadwell? She stormed out first, red blazer blazing, heels stabbing the floor like she wanted to injure the building itself. That told me everything. She knew she'd lost control of the room, and losing control was the one thing the enforcer in crimson couldn't tolerate. I didn't chase her, not yet, because I saw something more important. Marcus shaking so hard his hands couldn't unclasp from each other, his breathing shallow, eyes glossy, guilt written in every twitch of his shoulders. This was the moment Part 7 demanded, the conflicted witness stepping into the light. I walked toward him slowly, making sure he didn't feel cornered. "Marcus," I said quietly, "you didn't do anything wrong by telling the truth." He flinched. "You don't understand," his voice cracked. I knew it wasn't fireworks. I saw the hole in your fence that night. I should have reported it." "You were scared," my wife said gently as she approached. "Fear doesn't make you guilty. Staying silent does." He winced like the words hit deep. Around us, the HOA meeting room, emptied. Footsteps faded. The echoes of Roxanne's outrage still clung to the air, but here, right in front of us, was the real turning point. Marcus finally whispered, "She told me to keep quiet." Roxanne did. His throat bobbed. "She said if I mentioned anything, the board would cite me for the cracks in my driveway and force repairs I couldn't afford. Classic clipboard queen tactics. Brutal, petty, effective." "Marcus," I said, lowering myself to his eye level, "that wasn't a request from the HOA. That was coercion. It's illegal." He swallowed again, hard. "She threatens people all the time, but this—" He glanced at my wife, then at the folder she still held. "I saw where the bullet came from. I know the exact house. I know who fired it." My breath went still. This was it. The confession Part 7 was designed to reveal. He leaned closer. It wasn't a stranger, it was her. Roxanne fired it. Even though we suspected it, hearing it land was different. My wife stiffened, not with surprise, but with the clarity of someone mentally organizing evidence into a decisive grid. I placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Are you willing to put that in a sworn statement?" He shut his eyes. His knee bounced violently. I'm scared." "I know," I said, "but you saw my daughter right after it happened. You know why this matters." His voice dropped to a rasp. "She could have been killed. And next time," my wife added softly, "someone else's child might not be standing far enough away." That hit him harder than anything else. His breath shook, his posture deflated, but slowly, very slowly, he nodded. "Yes," he whispered. "I'll say everything. I'll tell Homeland Security, local police, anyone who needs to hear it. I won't let the tyrant in heels bully me into staying quiet anymore." A breath I didn't realize I'd been holding escaped my chest. This was the key. This was the testimony that cracked open the entire case. Before we could say anything else, a loud metallic clang echoed from outside, almost like a gate being slammed. The sound jolted Marcus upright. My wife exchanged a sharp look with me, because only one person slammed metal objects when she was angry enough to lose her composure. Roxanne Treadwell, the officer of rules who was now losing her grip. Marcus's voice trembled again. "She's going to retaliate. Let her try," I said, standing. "Because now, We're not just parents fighting back. My wife closed her evidence folder with a decisive click. We're a CSI specialist, she said, a father with a witness, and a community that just saw her crack, I finished. Marcus rose beside us, still shaky, still scared, but standing. He wasn't a conflicted witness anymore. He was our turning point. Marcus stayed close as we stepped out of the HOA building, though stepped out isn't the right phrase. It felt more like we crossed a threshold into a final arena, one where the board chair was waiting, coiled and furious. Roxanne Treadwell stood near the community gate, arms crossed so tightly her knuckles whitened. The streetlight caught the edge of her red blazer, giving her that familiar glow, the look of an enforcer in crimson ready to strike at whatever she couldn't control. She didn't speak. Not at first. She just watched Marcus like he'd personally betrayed a sacred oath. My wife stepped slightly in front of him, subtle bodyguard posture she'd perfected long before she ever married me. She didn't need a badge in her hand to intimidate someone. Her gaze alone could dismantle lies, molecule by molecule. I walked toward Roxanne, stopping just far enough to signal none of this was going to happen on her terms. You stormed out, I said quietly, which means you're scared. Her jaw ticked. I don't get scared, I get prepared. Prepared for what? My wife asked. The truth? The truth, the clipboard queen snapped, is whatever this board decides it is. There it was, pure HOA delusion in one sentence. But we didn't rise to it. We couldn't. This wasn't a shouting match. This was the beginning of our victory strategy. Part 8 was the planning stage, and everything we needed to execute was already in motion. I reached into my pocket and tapped my phone, bringing up the photo my wife had taken of the strike mark on the fence. Then another, the one showing the embedded pellet. Then the third, the one showing the start of a trajectory path. I kept my voice level. You know my wife's a CSI specialist, right? Roxanne froze. Professional expertise wasn't something she could wave off with a violation notice, especially not when that expertise came with federal certification and a track record of airtight cases. My wife stepped forward, holding her tablet with the diagrams she'd been assembling since the moment she examined the yard. We've already mapped the angle, she said. The shot didn't come from a passing car or a random stranger. I watched the tyrant in heels swallow once, hard. It came, my wife continued, from an elevated position, slight downward angle, clear line of sight to our yard. Marcus flinched as if hearing it again was too real. And the elevation, she said, tapping the screen, matches one of only 3 second-floor decks in this community. I added softly, guess which one has a direct view of our family's photo spot? Roxanne didn't speak, didn't blink, didn't breathe. She knew exactly where this was going. Marcus stepped forward suddenly, voice soft but steady. I saw the flash from your deck that night. The officer of rules whipped her head toward him. You're lying. No, he whispered. I'm done lying. His statement hung in the air like a new law carved into stone. I pressed on. We have trajectory evidence, a federal-level specialist, a witness. I paused. And if we match residue to that deck, you won't find anything, Roxanne said quickly, too quickly. My wife tilted her head. So you cleaned it? Silence. The kind of silence that already feels like a confession. I took a step back, giving space for the gravity to sink into the moment. We're not here to argue with you. We're here to prepare our case. And to make one thing clear, my wife added, we will follow procedure, evidence, law, not intimidation. Roxanne's composure cracked, only a flicker, but enough. Her teeth pressed into her bottom lip, her nails digging into her arm like she needed the pain to stay grounded. What do you want? She finally hissed. Nothing from you, I said. What happens next isn't negotiation. Marcus let out a shaky breath. They're taking it to Homeland Security. The enforcer in crimson stiffened. That, my wife said, is how serious this is. For the first time since this nightmare began, Roxanne Treadwell looked small, not in size, but in certainty. The queen had finally realized her crown wasn't a shield. This was preparation. This was the moment the plan solidified. We turned to leave, and I felt Marcus fall into step beside us, still trembling, still scared, but moving forward. Because now, we weren't planning alone. The next morning, the fog hadn't even lifted off the cul-de-sac when I stepped outside. It wasn't really fog, it was that thin, early sun haze that makes everything look softer than it really is. Fitting because nothing about what we were about to do was soft. This was the preparation phase, the part where the truth stopped being a theory and started becoming a weapon. My wife was already in the yard with her kid open, wearing that steady CSI expression that meant her brain was 10 steps ahead of everyone else. She'd slept maybe 4 hours, but you wouldn't have known it. She moved with purpose, measured, focused, almost surgical. "Trajectory test first," she said without looking at me. "Angle confirmation, distance calibration, light pattern replication." I nodded. "Marcus is on his way." Right on cue, the conflicted witness walked up the driveway, hands tucked into his hoodie pockets. He looked like a man trying to outrun his own conscience. Every few steps, he glanced over his shoulder, as if Roxanne Treadwell might burst out of a hedge swinging a violation notice at him. "Relax," I told him. "She's not coming out here." He swallowed. "She's watching from her window." Of course she was. The board chair never missed a chance to monitor what she couldn't control. My wife didn't even turn around as she said, "Let her watch." Marcus let out a shaky breath and stepped closer. "What do you need me to do?" "Stay honest," my wife replied. "That's all?" He nodded, shoulders stiff. We moved to the fence line, where the pellet marks still dented the wood. It was barely visible now, but the evidence she'd already captured made it undeniable. Still, she wanted live replication. That's how she worked. No assumptions, no gaps. She placed a small digital reflector on the spot. "This will capture directional variance. Once we map the reflected pattern, we'll know the exact origin." Marcus pointed toward the row of second-story decks. "It's that one, hers." The enforcer in crimson chose that moment to step outside onto her deck, arms crossed, chin tilted, authority dripping off her like perfume. She didn't speak, she just stared down at us. My wife smiled without warmth. "Perfect, height confirmed." Roxanne stiffened. I raised my phone, recording everything. Not her face, just the deck height, angle, and visible structural alignment. Everything was factual, observable, neutral. That neutrality was what made it lethal to someone like her. "Why are you filming?" Roxanne demanded, voice sharp. "It's evidence," I answered calmly. "Not an accusation. Yet." Her eyes narrowed, the classic look of a clipboard queen who finally realized the clipboard didn't give her immunity. "You people think you're clever," she snapped. "No," my wife said. "We just think you're sloppy." The tyrant in heels gave a short, angry laugh. "You think anyone will believe you over this board? This community trusts us." "Not for long," Marcus whispered, barely audible, but enough. Roxanne's head jerked. "You." Marcus stepped forward, trembling but resolute. "I'm done covering for you, done pretending. I saw the flash, I heard the sound, and I'm not letting a toddler get hurt because you hate losing control." Silence rolled across the yard like a cold wind. Roxanne pointed a finger at him. "You'll regret this." "No," my wife said gently. "He just saved himself." The officer of rules glared at her next. "You can't prove anything." My wife lifted her tablet and tapped the trajectory overlay. "I can prove everything, and when Homeland Security arrives for their follow-up, they'll prove it again." Roxanne's face drained, just a shade, but enough to show she understood the shift. We continued our measurement tests. My wife used a calibrated rod to align the reflector with the projected origin point. Marcus walked to the estimated angle, stopping whenever she directed. I documented every angle, every distance, every shift in light. This wasn't guesswork. This was structure, science, process. And that's what terrified the clipboard queen most. She couldn't outvote physics. When we finished, my wife closed her kit and stood tall. "We have everything we need." Marcus exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for years. "We're taking this to the agency this afternoon," I told him. "And after that?" he asked. I looked up at the deck where Roxanne stood frozen. "After that, she answers for what she did." We walked back toward the house as the enforcer in crimson gripped her railing so tightly it looked like she might snap it. The preparation was complete. The drive to the Homeland Security field office felt different this time. Not like fear, not like anger, more like momentum, heavy, inevitable. Impossible to stop. My wife sat beside me with her tablet secured in her lap, the evidence map glowing faintly across the dark screen. Every time we hit a bump, the trajectory lines shifted like a warning flare. This is where it started. This is where it ends. Marcus followed us in his truck, hands locked on the wheel, posture tense. He wasn't backing out now. He couldn't. The truth had already dragged him out of the shadows, and the only direction left was forward. When we stepped into the agency lobby, the air felt colder, sharper. A Homeland Security analyst named Agent Navarro stood waiting, stone-faced, calm, clearly briefed. His attention flicked to my wife's evidence kit, then to Marcus hovering behind us like someone about to testify before a firing squad. "You said you have replication analysis and angle confirmation?" Navarro asked. My wife nodded. "Multiple calibrations, raw and processed." "Good," he said. "Let's take this to the review room." Inside, the lights dimmed as she projected her data onto a wall-sized monitor. The pellet mark reconstruction illuminated, followed by the trajectory vector she'd built with exacting precision. Navarro stepped closer, studying the alignment as though he were reading coordinates on a battlefield map. "You replicated from at least 3 distances?" he asked. 5, she replied. He raised a brow. "That's unusually thorough." "She doesn't do halfway," I said quietly. The agent nodded, then pointed to the upper right angle. "That's second-story elevation." "Correct," my wife answered. "And that deck belongs to Roxanne Treadwell." Marcus swallowed hard. "She's been escalating for months." Navarro turned. "Escalating how?" Marcus took a deep breath. "Harassment, retaliation, violations created out of nowhere. And yesterday she fired something into their yard, toward their toddler. I saw the flash myself." The agent didn't flinch. "How close to the child?" "Seconds," I said. He was 2 steps from the slide. Navarro nodded once, slow, deliberate. "All right. I'll need to speak with your HOA board." That sentence hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Because back home, the board chair always assumed she controlled the conversation, controlled the narrative, controlled the fear. But the federal government didn't respond to her emails with automatic deference. We followed Navarro back to the parking lot. He stopped by his SUV and turned to us. "Prepare for pushback. People like her don't admit fault. They build walls." "We've been living inside her walls for years," I said. "We're ready." He gave a short, approving nod, then climbed in and pulled out ahead of us, heading straight toward the neighborhood. The drive back felt electric. Every mailbox, every trimmed lawn, every quiet porch looked like it was waiting for something to break. And when we turned onto our street, we saw it. Roxanne Treadwell, arms stiff, posture rigid, was already marching toward Navarro's vehicle, wearing her signature red blazer like battle armor. The enforcer in crimson was in full display mode. Her chin was high, her shoulders squared, and her eyes locked onto the agent's badge with thinly veiled contempt. "We have protocols here," she snapped. "You can't just walk in and demand." Navarro held up a hand. "Ma'am, step back." The clipboard queen froze, offended. "I am the officer of rules on this street," she said, voice trembling with outrage. "You don't tell me to step back." "I do," Navarro replied evenly, "when there's an active investigation into a potential act of endangerment." Her expression twisted, shock first, then fear, then fury. She pointed at us. "They're lying. They've been plotting this since the beginning." Navarro didn't even glance our way. "Ma'am, we've seen the evidence. The trajectory doesn't lie." My wife spoke softly, but her words landed like thunder. "You should have thought of that before you pulled the trigger." Roxanne looked between us, her authority cracking in real time. "You think this ends with your little analysis?" she hissed. "I run this community." "Not anymore," Marcus said behind us, voice steady for the first time. Navarro stepped forward. "We're moving to formal questioning. I suggest you cooperate." The tyrant in heels staggered, just a subtle stumble, but unmistakable. Control was slipping through her fingers. And for the first time, she felt it. The community center had never been this full. Not for holiday events, not for elections, not even for the time the neighborhood tried to vote on banning gas leaf blowers. Tonight, every chair was taken. People lined the walls, whispering, glancing nervously toward the front, where a long folding table had been set up for the HOA board. Roxanne Treadwell stood at the center of it, rigid, defiant, trying to hold herself together under the fluorescent lights. Her red blazer was pressed sharp as a blade, but her hands, they kept twitching against the edges of her clipboard, like she couldn't decide whether to cling to it or throw it. Beside her sat two board members who looked like they regretted showing up at all. On the far end was Marcus, summoned as a required witness, but seated like someone prepared to flip the entire table. Homeland Security had requested this gathering. Navarro didn't wait for permission. He simply anchored himself near the front row, arms crossed, badge visible, presence heavy. He wasn't here to negotiate. He was here to watch the truth snap open in public. The board vice president cleared his throat. We'll begin shortly. Roxanne shot him a murderous look. We begin when I say we begin. That whisper traveled through the crowd. Exactly the kind of arrogance people had swallowed for years. But tonight the room wasn't cowering, it was charging. My wife and I stood near the front, not to intimidate, but because Navarro had asked us to. He wanted the evidence presentation to be visible, undeniable, unchallengeable. When the projector hummed on, every head turned. Navarro stepped forward. This meeting isn't about fines, or landscaping, or parking. It's about a discharge event that endangered a 2-year-old child. A ripple moved through the room. The officer of rules lifted her chin. There was no discharge event. This is a smear attempt by people who resent structure. Navarro clicked a button. The screen displayed the pellet impact site on our cedar fence. Scanned, measured, reconstructed. Roxanne's jaw tightened. Another click. Trajectory lines appeared, angles, distance calculations, height, deck coordinates, all sourced from my wife's forensic breakdown. The precision wasn't just convincing, it was irrefutable. Murmurs spread. Someone whispered, "Good Lord." Roxanne slammed her clipboard down. "This is fabricated." My wife stepped forward before Navarro could respond. "That's the thing about physics. You can't fabricate math." The clipboard queen spun on her. "You manipulated the data." "No," my wife said quietly. "I replicated it." The room fell silent, completely silent, until Marcus cleared his throat, loud, intentional, unignorable. I saw the flash from her deck. I heard the crack. I saw her step back like she didn't expect it to go that far. Gasps this time, raw, collective. Roxanne pointed at him with a shaking finger. "You're drunk half the time. Your testimony is worthless." Marcus lifted his head, voice steady. "I'm sober now, and I'm done covering for you." The tyrant in heels went sheet white. Navarro stepped forward. "We've also noted prior complaints, digital correspondence, and reports of escalating hostility. Combined with the forensic evidence, the conclusion is clear." People leaned in, hearts pounded. You could feel the room balancing on the edge of revelation. Navarro finished, "This was not an accident. It was a reckless act of endangerment performed from your property." The board vice president looked like he wanted to melt through his chair. "Roxanne, did you fire anything?" She stared out over the room, at the neighbors she'd controlled for years, at the ones she'd threatened, at the ones she assumed feared her more than the truth. And for a moment, for half a breath, she broke. "I was only trying to scare them," she whispered. The crowd reacted like a storm, splitting a tree. Shouts, gasps. A woman near the back covered her mouth. Someone muttered, "She could have killed that baby." Navarro raised a hand. "That's enough." He turned to the board. "Given the admission and the evidence, Homeland Security recommends immediate removal from office and referral for criminal review." The enforcer in crimson swallowed hard, her reign collapsing under the weight of her own words. The community center didn't feel afraid anymore. It felt awake. Roxanne Treadwell didn't move at first. She stood behind the board table, frozen, hollow-eyed, as if she couldn't quite process that the room she once dominated wasn't bowing to her anymore. The projector light washed her red blazer in a harsh glow, turning the enforcer in crimson into a silhouette of everything she'd built her power on: intimidation, noise, and a false sense of authority. But none of that worked now. The crowd didn't look at her with fear. They looked at her with clarity, with memory, with the realization that the person who had policed their grass height and holiday decorations had just confessed to firing a weapon toward a yard where a toddler was playing. Navarro stepped beside the table, not looming, just present. Ms. Treadwell, based on your admission and the investigative results, we'll be filing a formal referral. For now, you're ordered to relinquish all HOA authority immediately. The clipboard queen opened her mouth, but nothing came out except a faint rasp, like her voice had cracked under the weight of consequence. The board vice president, pale and shaking, finally found the courage he'd lacked for years. "Roxanne, please step down." Gasps fluttered. People leaned forward. This was the first time anyone on that board had ever told her, no. She swiveled toward him sharply. "You're spineless." He met her gaze, not defiant, just done. "I'm tired." Neighbors murmured, nodding. The tyrant in heels scoffed, grabbed her clipboard, and stormed toward the exit. But the room didn't part for her this time. People stayed exactly where they were, forcing her to navigate around them, bumping shoulders, muttering apologies she refused to acknowledge. When the door closed behind her, it sounded final. Navarro exhaled. "All right, let's regain order." The vice president wiped his palms on his slacks. "We need to address the community. Tonight." All eyes turned toward him. Toward us. Toward the fractured trust that needed rebuilding. I stepped forward because silence felt irresponsible. This neighborhood deserves more than reactionary rules and fear-based leadership. We need transparency, accountability, and people who don't let power warp their judgment. Whispers of agreement rippled. My wife came beside me, steady, calm, forensic mind still humming. "For what it's worth, the evidence is the evidence. Nothing more, nothing less. We didn't come to punish anyone. We came to protect our daughter." Her voice softened the room. It grounded everything that had felt explosive. Marcus cleared his throat from the back. "I'll volunteer for interim oversight, with strict checks on everything. No single person should run this place." Surprised glances, then nods, then claps. A woman in the second row stood. "I'll help too. I'm retired, and frankly, I've had enough of being scared of my own HOA." More hands rose. People who had been silent for years were now stepping up. Something in the air shifted, like a community lifting its head for the first time in a long time. Navarro looked around, satisfied. This is how neighborhoods should work. Outside the windows, blue dusk settled over Willow Bend, the cracked picket fence catching the last streaks of fading light. It didn't look like a symbol of a violation anymore. It looked like a symbol of what we almost lost. Because one person let power eclipse humanity. The board vice president tapped the mic again. "We'll hold a full election within 30 days. Open nominations, transparent voting, 0 backroom decisions." Applause filled the room. For the first time tonight, the noise felt hopeful. I glanced at my wife. She gave a small smile, the kind that said this wasn't the end of a battle, but the beginning of a safer home. Navarro gathered his files. "I'll be in touch regarding follow-ups, but for tonight, you did good." When the meeting adjourned, people approached us, not out of nosiness, but gratitude, relief, connection, the things an HOA should foster, not destroy. As we stepped outside, the cool night air hit my skin like a reset button. My daughter slept in her stroller, unaware of how close she'd come to danger, unaware of how much her safety had reshaped an entire neighborhood. I looked into the camera, into the eyes of every viewer who's ever faced someone who wielded power the wrong way, and said the final words this story deserved. If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from.